In 2012, the quiet community of Crescent Valley witnessed a tragedy that shocked everyone. A violent death tied to forbidden secrets, prejudice, and betrayal. The case of Henry Sullivan, a man driven by a haunting past and consuming hatred, exposed hidden lives and motives that spiraled into a deadly climax. Crescent Valley, a small, predominantly white suburb, is known for its quiet streets and close-knit community. But behind the charming facades of this town, however, is a darker undercurrent, shaped by histories of prejudice and lingering racial tension. Here lives Henry Sullivan, a 47-year-old contractor who has spent his life building walls, literal ones in his work, and emotional ones in his personal life. On the outside, he is a respectable man, well known among his neighbors as an attentive husband to his wife, Claire, who runs a modest floral shop in town. But beneath the veneer of Henry's respectability lies a deep-seated bitterness. As a teenager, Henry endured the traumatic death of his mother, Evelyn, a woman he adored and saw as his whole world. Evelyn had been a strict but loving single mother, working tirelessly to make ends meet. When Henry was 12, Evelyn was fatally injured in a house fire, one that investigators traced back to a small electrical issue in the laundry room where her black maid, Miss LaShonda, had been working. Though the official report labeled it an accident, Miss LaShonda was suspected but never formally charged. Henry's mind filled in the blanks, seeing only injustice and blaming Miss LaShonda for the tragedy. He grew up resenting the fact that, in his eyes, a black woman had not only been responsible, but had escaped punishment. That pain hardened into hatred, twisting into a bitter disdain for black people that Henry carried into adulthood. In the years that followed, Henry married Claire, hoping her gentle nature might calm his own simmering anger. But Claire never knew the extent of his resentment, only sensing that Henry had a darker side he rarely spoke of. He shielded this side from her, believing she would never understand, and it became a hidden part of his identity. Henry used his bitterness as fuel to assert his power whenever he could, often taking pride in his work and in the control he had over his surroundings. He often found himself relishing moments when he could cause trouble for black neighbors, co-workers, or strangers. On a rainy day in late March 2012, Henry crossed paths with Naomi Johnson in a local grocery store. Naomi was 32, a mother of 2 young children, and had recently been laid off from her job as a medical receptionist. Her husband had passed away in a car accident 3 years earlier, leaving her as the sole provider for her family. Life had become a series of struggles for Naomi, overcoming grief, making ends meet, and enduring the judgmental eyes of those around her as she fought to care for her children, Caleb and Joy. Despite her hardships, Naomi was known for her resilience and quiet strength. She often reminded herself that her children needed her to be strong, even on days when it felt impossible. That afternoon, Naomi had gone to the store with just a few dollars, knowing she could only afford the bare essentials. Yet, as she wandered the aisles, her heart ached with the thought of her children's hungry faces, and she made a desperate decision. Quietly, she slipped a can of soup and a small bag of rice into her purse. She felt a surge of guilt, but the thought of her children going hungry hardened her resolve. She turned the corner toward the exit, her nerves on edge, only to come face to face with Henry. Henry caught her red-handed, a smug look of triumph crossing his face as he realized what she was doing. There was a satisfaction in his expression as he saw the fear and shame on Naomi's face. He felt the familiar thrill of superiority, relishing the moment he could make her feel small and powerless. For Henry, this was more than catching a shoplifter. It was an opportunity to remind someone like her of her place. As Naomi pleaded, her words spilling out in desperation, Henry watched her closely, almost feeding off her fear. She explained her situation, her recent job loss, and the struggle to feed her children, her voice shaking as she tried to maintain some semblance of dignity. In that moment, she felt a mix of vulnerability and humiliation, yet a determination to protect her children. Henry absorbed every word with growing satisfaction, his mind already racing with possibilities. He made it clear to her that he had control over her fate, making her feel as though any hope for mercy rested solely in his hands. He suggested that there was a way to avoid police involvement, but she would have to do exactly as he said. Naomi, backed into a corner with no alternative, and fearful of what a criminal charge could mean for her children's future, reluctantly agreed. Over the next few months, Henry would call Naomi at unpredictable times, often demanding that she meet him in secluded places, an empty lot near the grocery store, a run-down motel on the edge of town. Each time, he reminded her that she was at his mercy, reinforcing his belief in her supposed inferiority with every sneer and degrading comment. For him, this arrangement was the ultimate assertion of power, a way to feel control over a person he deemed lesser. Each encounter left Naomi emotionally bruised, but she endured it for the sake of her children, compartmentalizing her pain as best as she could. Henry grew bolder, treating her with increasing cruelty, even using his words to deepen her shame. He would occasionally make remarks about her children, implying that they were better off without a mother who resorted to stealing. To him, the arrangement was not just about physical control, but a twisted form of retribution, a means to fulfill his need for power and to unleash his deeply ingrained hatred. Naomi, meanwhile, held on, her resolve hardening with each encounter, though she told herself that this torment was temporary and that she could withstand it if it meant her children's safety. As summer wore on, the weight of her secret became a heavy burden for Naomi, yet she refused to let her children see her pain. She continued to care for them, preparing meals from what little she could afford, helping with homework, and tucking them in each night. She kept her daily struggles hidden, determined to shield them from the harshness of their reality. Her resilience was a quiet protest against Henry's cruelty, a reminder to herself that, in her heart, she was stronger than the hatred he spewed. In these moments, Henry's control was offset by Naomi's enduring dignity, even as she suffered. He might have been able to manipulate her actions, but her mind remained her own, and she clung to it fiercely. Still, each encounter chipped away at her spirit, her sense of self slowly eroding under the weight of his hate-filled gaze. The encounters continued through autumn, with Henry growing more ruthless, pushing her further as if daring her to break. Naomi's tolerance reached its limit one evening in October, when, after another humiliating encounter, she resolved to find a way to end this torment. Her thoughts turned to a plan, a way to regain control of her life, to reclaim the dignity Henry had tried to take from her. By the late fall of 2012, Naomi had endured months of Henry's degradation, an endless cycle of silent suffering as she tried to shield her children from the horrors she was facing. Day by day, she felt her patience erode. With each new insult, each display of Henry's cruel dominance, she began to realize that she couldn't allow this torment to continue forever. What had begun as an act of desperation to protect her children had turned into a prison, one she longed to escape. Henry had grown more ruthless, almost thriving on the misery he imposed on her. To him, Naomi was a reminder of every grievance and hatred he had clung to since his mother's death. His anger had twisted his mind so completely that each moment of power over her seemed to fuel him, as if each encounter was a form of revenge he felt entitled to. But for Naomi, each encounter further wore her down, pushing her resolve to the breaking point. One overcast day in mid-November, during yet another encounter, something inside Naomi snapped. Henry was in the middle of one of his usual tirades, his tone laced with disgust as he hurled insults about her and even her family, calling them names and sneering as he spoke about his own wife, Claire, and her inadequacies in comparison. The words stung, but this time, rather than feeling defeated, Naomi felt an unfamiliar surge of defiance. She held her phone quietly in her hand, out of sight, and hit the record button. Henry, lost in his anger and oblivious to her actions, continued his cruel monologue, unaware that every degrading word he spoke was being captured. As Naomi listened to his words, she felt the sting of his hatred, yet something else began to grow within her, an unexpected strength, born from the realization that she finally had something he couldn't control. She listened to him speak about his wife as though she were disposable, a mere fixture in his life who failed to meet his expectations. He even spoke of Naomi herself in the most demeaning terms, reducing her to an object meant solely for his satisfaction, adding insult to her every existence. Yet she stayed silent, keeping her focus on the recording. In that moment, she realized that she could turn his own words against him, using the power he had tried so hard to strip from her. In the following days, Naomi felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew that what she had in her hands was her way out. This recording was her ticket to reclaiming her life, a way to finally stand up to the man who had tormented her for so long. Her mind raced with possibilities. She thought about sending the recording to the police, but she feared the repercussions, worried it might spiral into something beyond her control. Then another idea formed, one that seemed both powerful and just. She would send it to Claire, Henry's wife. In the quiet of her small apartment on the November 20th, after putting her children to bed, Naomi sat alone, listening to the recording once more. Each degrading word he spoke reminded her of the torment she'd suffered, the countless humiliations she had endured. She imagined what it would be like for Claire to hear these words, to hear Henry speak about her with such cruelty, and to learn of his actions with Naomi. It was a difficult decision, and Naomi felt a twinge of guilt, knowing that Claire was an innocent bystander in this nightmare. But she believed that Claire had a right to know, to understand the man she shared her life with. At midnight, with her heart pounding, Naomi composed an anonymous email, attaching the recording and typing out a simple message. "This is the man you married." With a final deep breath, she hit send. The email arrived in Claire's inbox on the morning of November 21st. She had no idea who it was from, nor any inkling of the storm that was about to consume her life. She opened the email and clicked on the attachment, her brow furrowing in confusion. But as Henry's voice filled the room, every word dripped with venom, seeping into her mind with brutal clarity. Claire listened in shock as her husband spoke about her with an unfiltered disdain, reducing her to nothing more than an insufficient wife. The way he belittled her, casually criticizing her appearance and dismissing her worth, pierced her deeply. As the recording continued, Claire's horror only grew. She heard Henry's demeaning words about Naomi, a woman she had never met, yet someone who clearly suffered under Henry's control. Every vile comment, every insult, painted a picture of a man she had never truly known. The revelations shattered Claire's world, each hateful word unraveling the life she thought she had built with him. She couldn't fathom how he could harbor so much anger and hatred, not only toward Naomi, but toward her as well. It was as if the man she loved had vanished, replaced by a monster she no longer recognized. For the rest of the day, Claire was in a daze. She moved mechanically through her daily routine, replaying the recording in her mind, each word echoing with renewed horror. She knew that she couldn't stay with him. The thought of confronting Henry felt daunting, even terrifying, but staying by his side after knowing the truth seemed even worse. On the November 22nd, Claire finally made her decision. She packed her belongings, collecting her essentials in quiet haste, as though every moment was a countdown to her escape. She left a note on the kitchen counter, short and to the point, explaining that she could no longer be part of his life. She didn't wait for him to come home, nor did she leave a forwarding address. In one swift, silent move, Claire left the home they had built together, stepping away from a marriage that had in an instant become unbearable. When Henry returned that evening and found the house empty, his anger surged like a storm, filling the quiet rooms with a rage that seemed to spill from every corner. At first, he was stunned, unable to process her absence. But as he read her note, the reality set in, and his anger took root, fueled by the knowledge that Naomi was behind his humiliation. He realized that the woman he despised had struck back, tearing apart his life from within. In his mind, Naomi had dared to defy him, taking a part of his life that he believed was his to control. The humiliation stung deeper than any wound he had ever known, stripping him of the power he so desperately clung to. He saw her defiance as an unforgivable betrayal, a personal attack on his pride and authority. His thoughts spiraled as he replayed every moment with Naomi, each memory feeding his growing desire for revenge. On November 23rd, as the first light of dawn crept over Crescent Valley, Henry swore he would make Naomi pay for the life she had destroyed. His fury was no longer just a simmering resentment. It had ignited into a consuming rage, one that blinded him to reason. In his mind, Naomi's betrayal demanded retribution, a price that he believed she alone should pay. It was a bitterly cold evening on December 12th, 2012, the type of night when the wind howled through the empty streets of Crescent Valley, rattling windows and making the trees shiver in the harsh air. Naomi had left work late, exhausted from her long shift at the diner, and eager to get home to her children. She walked briskly, hands stuffed into her coat pockets, her mind on Caleb and Joy, who would be waiting for her. But as she neared an empty stretch of road on the outskirts of town, an eerie sense of unease crept over her. The street lights flickered, casting long shadows, and the only sound was her own footsteps echoing in the silence. Henry had been watching her for days, tracking her movements in a calculated plan to confront her. His anger had festered into something dangerous, a seething wrath that clouded his judgment and consumed his every thought. He blamed Naomi for everything: his shattered marriage, his humiliation, and the deep wound to his pride. As he watched her that night, the lines between his hatred and his need for revenge blurred. His resentment had become a twisted form of obsession, fueled by the belief that Naomi needed to pay for her disrespect. Without hesitation, he stepped out from the shadows, intercepting her path. Startled, Naomi turned to see him standing just a few feet away, his face twisted in rage, his eyes dark and unyielding. She could feel the malevolence radiating off him, a palpable anger that made her blood run cold. There was no kindness, no restraint left in his expression. In an instant, Naomi realized that she was face to face with a man who saw her not as a person, but as a target for his wrath. Henry closed the distance between them, grabbing her arm with a force that nearly pulled her off her feet. He dragged her into a narrow alleyway, the dim light casting shadows that twisted around them as the tension mounted. Naomi's mind raced, fear pulsing through her veins as she struggled to free herself from his grip. She felt a surge of panic, yet an instinct for survival kicked in as she sensed the danger she was truly in. Henry's grip was tight, his fingers pressing into her skin with a ferocity that left bruises. But she fought back, her desperation giving her strength she didn't know she had. As Henry's rage boiled over, he moved to wrap his hands around her neck, his fingers squeezing tightly, cutting off her breath. Naomi felt the life being forced from her, her vision blurring as she gasped for air, her hands clawing at his arms. Memories of her children flashed through her mind, fueling her resolve. She knew that she had to survive this, not just for herself, but for Caleb and Joy, who depended on her. She used every ounce of her strength, twisting and pushing against him, struggling to break free. In the struggle, Henry stumbled, his balance slipping as his anger clouded his sense of control. Naomi pushed with all her might, causing him to stagger backward, his heel catching on the uneven ground of the alley. He tripped, his body crashing against the wall behind him. The impact sent a tremor through the structure, dislodging a large, loose brick above him. In a split second, the stone tumbled down, striking him squarely on the head. He fell to the ground, his body limp and unmoving. For a moment, Naomi stood frozen, her chest heaving as she tried to process what had just happened. She could feel her heart pounding, a mixture of shock and disbelief settling over her. Henry lay before her, motionless, the alley cloaked in an unnatural silence. She realized, with a jolt, that she was alive, that she had somehow survived the encounter. Yet, even as relief washed over her, she felt a deep sadness. The entire ordeal, the hatred, the violence, and now his death, had left a scar on her soul that she knew would never fully heal. In the stillness of the alley, Naomi knew she had to act quickly. Though every fiber of her being wanted to run, to put the horrifying scene behind her, she forced herself to remain calm. She retrieved her phone with trembling hands and dialed the police. her voice steady as she reported the incident. Minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the air, echoing down the empty streets of Crescent Valley as police cars pulled up, their lights casting a stark contrast against the dark alley. The officers approached cautiously, and Naomi stood nearby, silently recounting what had happened. She explained, in clear and measured tones, the events that had led to Henry's death, emphasizing that it had been an act of self-defense. As the officers reviewed the scene, one of them noted the surveillance camera positioned at the edge of the alley. They immediately retrieved the footage, which captured the entire encounter from beginning to end. The video confirmed Naomi's story, showing Henry's aggression, the struggle, and the moment the brick fell, ending his life. As Naomi watched them review the footage, a sense of relief mingled with exhaustion. She knew that the evidence was undeniable, and the truth of her actions was clear. She had done only what was necessary to protect herself. And though she felt a deep sadness for the path Henry had chosen, she knew she could finally be free from his torment. By March 8, 2013, the investigation concluded, and the police report was officially filed, closing the case as self-defense. Naomi's life, though forever marked by the tragedy, began to slowly return to a semblance of normalcy. With the weight of fear lifted, she focused on her children, finding solace in the quiet moments they shared together. For the first time in months, she felt safe, free from the oppressive cloud that Henry's presence had cast over her life. Meanwhile, in the community of Crescent Valley, word of the incident spread quickly. The townspeople, who had long seen Henry as an upstanding man, were left reeling. His secret hatred and violent tendencies shocked those who knew him, forcing many to confront the unsettling truth of how little they had known him. The community grappled with the implications of his actions, reflecting on the prejudice that had simmered just below the surface. For Claire, the loss of her husband brought a complex wave of emotions. She mourned the man she thought she had known, but as she processed the revelations of his true character, she felt a strange sense of liberation. She had spent years with a man whose hatred and anger she had never fully understood, and now she could finally release herself from the weight of that relationship. In the quiet of her new life, she found peace, knowing that she could move forward free from the shadows of her past. In the months that followed, the community held discussions, examining the impact of unchecked hatred and prejudice. Neighbors and families took the tragedy as a stark reminder of how deeply these feelings could poison lives, even in a quiet town like Crescent Valley. Naomi, too, was forever changed by the experience. Yet, she emerged stronger, knowing that she had faced the worst of human cruelty and had survived. Her strength became a source of inspiration to others, a testament to resilience in the face of hardship. As she moved forward, she held her head high, her spirit unbroken, and her heart filled with gratitude for the life she could now rebuild with her children, safe and secure at last. The tragic events left scars, but from them, Naomi forged a new path, one defined by freedom, hope, and the courage to stand tall, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. This case, a twisted reflection of love, power, and revenge, serves as a chilling reminder of the dark secrets hidden behind closed doors and the strength it takes to stand against those who seek to break you. Just like the case in which a Venezuelan immigrant's affair with a married neighbor ends in murder, I know you'll enjoy this case. Make sure to check it out. And don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next case.